Welcome back to Watch the Bookerman and to episode number 16 of Paul Heyman's TNA 2010. We come off the back of that special edition of Impact last week with another show that continues the build to Lockdown. We've not promoted as much for this week's show, but there are two huge matches specifically which will see us crown new number one contenders for the two top titles. The Knockouts title, we'll find out the number one contender to that title in a battle royal, while we'll open the show with a number one contendership match for AJ Styles' World Heavyweight Championship. The first match of tonight's show, we are kicking off with a bang. In that match, we will find out the main event of Lockdown. Mr. Anderson and Kurt Angle are both confirmed to be in that match, but as we return, as we always do, to the Impact Zone, there is a wild card selection who may well walk out as the number one contender. And as you can see, the third man is D'Angelo Dinero. He has had 4 matches since coming back to TNA, and he has won them all. For that reason, Paul Heyman decided to throw a spanner in the works of what seemed to be a 2-horse race between Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson. Of course, in terms of the booking, it was unfortunately to have a fall guy in there, Kurt Angle picking up the victory with a angle slam to D'Angelo Dinero in 18 minutes and 2 seconds. So a really long competitive match. A couple of decent performances from Anderson and Dinero, but Kurt Angle with the big win. A 74 is a good way to open the show, while the match deserved better announcing, and we're still having that issue with me making the mistake on the alignment of Mr. Anderson. It does get the show off to a hot start and gets the crowd hotter. D'Angelo Dinero unfortunately taking his first fall since returning to TNA, but there's no shame in losing to Kurt Angle, who stands tall following the match, having his arm raised as the commentators confirmed that it will be the Olympic gold medalist against AJ Styles for the World Heavyweight Championship at that Lockdown event. AJ Styles comes down to the ring to greet his next challenger, and the two men who had that issue with each other 2 weeks ago go face to face. The TNA World Heavyweight Champion applauds Kurt Angle for his victory. Angle doesn't really like this. He thinks it's once again AJ patronising him. As he showed a tendency to recently, Kurt Angle lashes out at AJ Styles, headbutting him and laying him out in the ring. With the champion down on the canvas, Kurt Angle heads to the back. That is a really good segment. Niro and Taz shocked by the actions of Kurt Angle. He seems to have this edge to him. His back's been pushed against the wall, and Taz says that Kurt seems to feel that his only option is to lash out at anybody and everybody who comes in his path. So it's not that we're pushing Angle now as a heel or anything like that. It is just that the way his character's developed with the dynamic with Paul Heyman, he's now very much a caged animal, and whoever is his opponent, whether it's a face or a heel, he's going to do whatever it takes to beat them. And of course, his ultimate goal is to become the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. An 85 rated segment is really good, gaining heat to the storyline, which was previously the Angle Anderson storyline. It now incorporates AJ Styles in that. I should probably change its name, but nonetheless, really happy with that as the start of the show. And we return from the break and we're continuing. We want to make it seem like we're really we've only got 2 weeks, so we're putting the importance on the Kurt Angle AJ Styles match as much as we can in a fairly short period of time. And an intense looking Kurt Angle, he's storming through the back when he's approached by Jeremy Borash. Borash looks tentative, as he should. Kurt Angle, in this state of mind, is a very scary figure. He asks for an explanation for Kurt's actions before the break. He wants to know why he headbutted AJ Styles, and Kurt Angle says that he isn't here to make friends in TNA, and until he's the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, nothing else matters, and everybody is a rival. Angle says that AJ Styles wants to look down on him because he's the TNA World Heavyweight Champion, because Paul Heyman wants to position the Phenomenal One as the face of TNA Wrestling, but at Lockdown, this grand vision of Heyman doesn't mean a damn thing when AJ Styles finds himself locked in a steel cage with the greatest wrestler in the world. So it's another good segment and does lose the heat unfortunately because of how good that previous segment was. We need to probably have a big segment on the Go Home show, which, if you remember on the previous pay-per-view, we actually lost heat to 2 major storylines with a poor closing segment. So the Go Home this time has to be very good, because Angle AJ has the potential to be our best match yet, but we need that strong storyline to go with it or it will get that penalty. Kurt Angle improvising well nonetheless, and it's another good segment featuring him. We then get Niro and Taz discussing the explosive events of the night so far. We're about half an hour into the show as this segment begins, and they use this to segue into introducing a video package that promotes the Lockdown pay-per-view. It features famous moments from the event's 5-year history. It is voiced over by Paul Heyman, and we see clips from AJ Styles v Abyss, Jeff Hardy v Raven, Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe. There's been plenty of great matches in TNA history. Last year we had Suicide take that huge dive from the top of the cage. It was that year where he retained the X Division Championship in that X Division Escape match. It's also put over as the most violent pay-per-view in pro wrestling history, and I've said before that I'm not a huge fan of all steel cage match pay-per-views, but I think if you're going to do it, then you've got to put it over as the 6 sides of steel for every match. Every competitive rivalry is now locked inside a steel cage. There'll be no excuses, there'll be no outside interference, so these are going to be brutal fights to the death, only one person standing tall at the end. This year, the signature match type of the event will see Team Hardy face Team Wolf. They have been putting their teams together over the last couple of weeks in a lethal lockdown match, as well as the just confirmed World Heavyweight Championship match. There will be an X Division Escape match again this year. It's really awkward to say that X Division Escape. I might just start saying Escape because Escape really doesn't flow off the tongue very well, but Kazarian will defend his championship against multiple opponents. I'm not sure if it will be a 5-way or a 6-way yet, but that's the video package that is just putting over the lethal lockdown and lockdown in general. If we've got new fans from the Paul Heyman era coming across and seeing what TNA is all about, I think there will be intrigue about A, the 6 sides of steel, B, the fact that it's an all steel cage pay-per-view, and it is, after all, behind Slammiversary and Bound for Glory, one of our signature events, and we also want to put that across as strongly as we can as Hernandez and Morgan. Hernandez is already confirmed as a member of Team Jeff Hardy. Matt Morgan looking likely to be confirmed in the very near future. They defeat Jesse Neal and Rhino, who were working together before the Paul Heyman era and in that 2 months that are booked on TEW 2016. It's a squash for the two of them because Neal and Rhino aren't really anybody who have plans for at the minute. There was the sort of storyline we had with Team 3D that involved Rhino as well, but they're very, very rarely available to work TNA shows, so that storyline has sort of crumbled by the wayside, and unfortunately somebody has to take the fall, and it is only a 4-minute match and a very poor match, a 38 rating. Hernandez and Morgan doing pretty well, to be fair. Rhino not doing too badly. Jesse Neal, the weak link in the match, and the colour commentary helping the match. It's not very often that our commentary gives the show a boost, so that's a good thing. But yeah, a really poor match, and the two men stand tall after the match. Hernandez and Morgan, one of them confirmed on Team Hardy, like I said. It seems to be a matter of time before Matt Morgan is confirmed as another member of that team. Later tonight, Desmond Wolfe will team with 2 members of his team going into lockdown against Jeff Hardy and 2 as yet unannounced members of his team. So we're building that throughout the night. Jeff Hardy's mystery tag team partners, who from the TNA roster will be confirmed as the 4th and 5th, maybe 3rd and 4th actually, considering Matt Morgan is yet to be confirmed, but we'll find out who that will be in the main event of tonight's show, so hopefully a hook to keep people interested throughout the rest of the night. We then get a pre-recorded sit-down interview conducted by Daniels, who is dressed the part, he's suited up, and he is speaking with his partner Kazarian, who is sat with his fiancée Tracy Brooks. Daniels explains that they've been trying to set up part 2 of Kazarian's interview for weeks, but they couldn't find a non-biased journalist in TNA to conduct it. They weren't going to have Jeremy Borash or Mike Tenay try and weave their agenda into proceedings and to tell the TNA side of the story, but that's when it hit them. They were going to control their own story, and they weren't going to let anybody paint them as the bad guys in this tale. Kazarian talks about how he explained last time why he became Suicide after losing the belief in himself and his ability to represent TNA. But now he's here to explain why he took off the mask, and it goes back to that first show of 2010. It was a new day, a fresh era in TNA, and the Ultimate X was his perfect opportunity to show the world once again why he is the greatest athlete to ever compete in the X Division. He was going to walk out as the X Division champion once again, and whether it's Suicide or Kazarian, there is nobody who has held that title more than him. But instead, Kazarian had another idea, of course he did, and he dove from the top of the structure onto his opponents, and he was responsible for the first moment of the new era. The fans were chanting TNA, Mauro Ranallo yelled at the top of his lungs, but at the end of the match, nobody spoke about Suicide. Instead, Amazing Red walked out as the X Division champion, and everybody spoke about how he was the perfect embodiment of what an X Division athlete should be, that he perfectly represented this division. Meanwhile, having potentially shortened his career, having risked his life. Who gave a damn about suicide laying in a heap at ringside? The people loved to watch suicide, that much is true, but they were just as happy to watch him crash and burn and to watch him fail. Nobody gave a damn about the man under the hood because suicide was a fearless, death-defying superhero. He was a video game character come to life, and if these people actually believe that, then they're even dumber than Kazarian thought they were. But Kazarian wants to talk about the man beneath the mask, the person who these people all seem to have forgotten about over these last couple of years, and that brings him to his own story and his first experience of Paul Heyman's regime and his first experience of this new era in TNA. January 7th, 2010. The first Impact of the decade, nothing out of the ordinary, except from the fact that this show was airing live on Spike TV. Kazarian says that he's not trying to shatter any illusions here, but he has to peel back the curtain for this story to make sense. In TNA, while the show has always aired on Thursday nights, the schedule for wrestlers had been Monday, Tuesday, once a fortnight. So, Kazarian had this penciled in. The 4th and 5th of January, he'd be at TNA. As for the 7th of January, there was something else. Kazarian then turns to his wife and says, "Our wedding." At the last minute, TNA changed the schedule, something that is part and parcel of being a wrestler, but he had to do the hardest thing he'd ever done in his life. He had to tell his friends, he had to tell their families, and he had to tell his wife-to-be that their wedding wouldn't be happening. He had to rearrange what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, but they showed what TNA meant to them, their willingness to put everything down because they wanted to impress the new man in charge. They didn't want to be seen as somebody who wasn't there for that first night. They didn't want to get lost in the shuffle, and they wanted to make a great first impression. So instead of getting married, they travelled across the country and he put that mask on again. It might sound obvious, but in every way, Kazarian had lost who he was as a man. He then takes us back to him laying there at ringside on the 7th of January, on what should have been his wedding night, and he felt completely numb. There would be no pats on the back for his performance, no thank yous for dropping everything to compete for TNA, because he wasn't Kazarian, he was Suicide, this dark, mysterious vigilante who didn't have feelings and he didn't have any personal ties. But Kazarian says that that was the lowest he's ever felt. Even when he quit TNA the first time, this was worse than that. He was done, full stop. He has one man to thank for pulling him back from the edge. His friend, his brother, and his greatest, but also his worst influence, Daniels. Looking over his shoulder, Kazarian then goes on to talk about how just a few weeks later, after embracing Daniels, he became the X Division champion once again. He has now beaten every single challenger since that date, so at Lockdown, it comes to the X Division Escape. Kazarian mockingly points out that he has beaten everybody in that match before, so they've decided to band together to try and take his title. But that's not going to happen, because this year, Kazarian isn't going to climb to the top of the cage. He's not going to dive from the top of the structure to try and please these fans. Instead, he's going to scale the cage and climb down the other side. Kazarian isn't here anymore to make memories for these fans. He's here to make money for his family. And on top of that, he's going to leave as the X Division champion. So Daniel's struggling when going off script there, but a pretty good interview between the two of them. It took me longer to say it than it actually was in game. It was only 3 minutes in game. I probably should have made that 4 or 5 minutes considering how much we went into, but a good segment overall. A little bit more character to Kazarian as we go into the next segment. Mr. Anderson and Rob Terry shown in the back speaking with Desmond Wolfe. Mr. Anderson is frustrated about losing out on the number one contendership, but says that he is now on board with Desmond Wolfe. He officially joins their team, and while Eric Young and Desmond Wolfe are already confirmed for the main event against Jeff Hardy and his two unknown partners, Mr. Anderson of course can't compete, so he suggests that Rob Terry joins them against those three men. Desmond Wolfe likes the idea, but appearing from out of nowhere, seemingly, Eric Young walks into the shot. he goes face to face with Rob Terry and says that while the World Elite might be over, he's keeping his eyes on Rob Terry tonight just in case that traitor wants to stab him in the back again. While the team is finalised for tonight's match, Desmond Wolfe already looks concerned by the tension in the locker room. This will obviously develop as they face Jeff Hardy and his two mystery partners in tonight's main event. Mr. Anderson and Eric Young doing well improvising throughout the segment, although it does lose heat to the storyline. A 64 rating is decent though, as we go into another segment, just Tara joining Mauro Ranallo and Taz at ringside for commentary ahead of the Knockouts Championship #1 contenders Battle Royal. The winner of that match will face Tara for the championship at Lockdown. And as we see, it is a subpar wrestling match but has a decent reaction from the crowd. A 54 isn't too bad and does add things to the things are getting ugly, kind of the all-encompassing storyline of the Knockouts division, which isn't a good sign really. We come down to a final four: Alyssa Flash, Velvet Sky, Lacey Von Erich and Angelina Love. Velvet Sky and Angelina are trying to get rid of Lacey Von Erich, but Lacey Von Erich manages to throw Velvet to the outside, so getting another one over on the beautiful people, but eventually Alyssa Flash throws Lacey Von Erich out. That leaves us with Alyssa Flash and Angelina Love left as the last two, and Angelina takes some sort of underhanded tactic and wins the Battle Royal in 9 minutes and 42. She will face Tara at the pay-per-view, and Tara leaves her position at the commentary table, heading to the top of the ramp. A pretty simple segment to close the first hour of Impact. Angelina Love stares down the champion, who raises the title above her head. The end, like I said, of the first hour of Impact. We then get a segment before the fourth match of the night, and it's just Kazarian and Daniels shown heading towards the curtain. They had that interview earlier in the night, but they are now confronted by Matt Morgan and Hernandez. The two men tell Kaz and Daniels that they're sick of seeing them push people around, just like they're sick of seeing Desmond Wolfe do the same, and they're not going to stand for it. Morgan says that now Tomko is gone, they don't have their insurance policy, so they might want to think about finding themselves a new bodyguard, because they're not going to be pushing anybody around anymore. Hernandez and Morgan are going to make sure of that. Kazarian and Daniels try to brush off the confrontation, but are then stopped in their tracks again by Jay Lethal, with just putting over that a lot of people are mad at these two. They do not like them. They are not popular figures within the locker room, and Jay Lethal suggests that Creed and Red are going to put them in their place before one of them takes the title from Kazarian at Lockdown. So Kaz, Daniels and Morgan all improvising well, advancing two storylines pretty well with a 60 rated segment. Hernandez not doing well, but not too much of a concern there as we go into that match. It's a good match, a 67 rating. Good heat and decent wrestling. Kazarian and Daniels do pick up the victory when Daniels pins Amazing Red with an Angel's Wings. Creed the weak link, as he quite often is. Daniels doing really well. Red and Kazarian also doing well, continuing the X Division storyline. It might seem a little bit strange to have Daniels, who isn't involved in that match, get the fall, but that's because we're trying to build something separate with Daniels, as we see in the following segment, as Kazarian and Daniels continue to beat down their opponents after the bell, looking to send that message to the X Division competitors who will compete against Kazarian at Lockdown. As the attack goes on, Jay Lethal runs down as quickly as he can, but again, outnumbered by the duo, he's kind of taken down until he finds surprising backup, an unexpected saviour in the form of Abyss. Last week, of course, Abyss took Tomko out of the company. Tomko's contract's expired between this show and the previous show. That's why we're kind of definitively saying that there's no more Tomko. He officially isn't with the company. Abyss's presence results in Kaz and Daniels heading for higher ground. Of course, they want nothing to do with Abyss, having seen what he is capable of. Jay Lethal then puts his hand on the shoulder of Abyss. He's thanking him for the backup. He's happy to have avoided being beaten down like Creed and Red were, but Abyss wasn't there to make friends and did not like Lethal touching him in the slightest. Abyss turns, grabs Lethal by the throat and chokeslams him in the middle of the ring. He then turns his attention to Daniels, raising the global championship in the air, showing that he is not quite done with that group. Of course, Tomko took out Abyss originally on the behest or to try and prove himself to Daniels and Kazarian, so Abyss, of course, partially blaming them, and he kind of has to because Tomko isn't here anymore, for him to take his aggression out on. It's not a heel turn or hints at a heel turn, anything like that from Abyss. Him chokeslamming Jay Lethal is just further putting over that he is this unhinged, uncontrollable monster. He's not going to be this nice guy who buddies up with Jay Lethal. He is still that very, very dangerous man. Lacey Von Erich is then interviewed in the back with Lauren Brooke, and she's disappointed about losing earlier in the night. She was the third last competitor, so she came pretty close, but she's happy to make a huge announcement. That's the kind of, it sounds like a negative trait really, but the sort of shallowness of the Lacey Von Erich character, she's disappointed, but she's got an announcement, so she's happy now, with the confirmation of Angelina Love v Tara at Lockdown for the Knockouts Championship. She has been officially named as the gatekeeper. With her ugly stick in hand, Lacey says that this makes her the enforcer at ringside for that pay-per-view match. She's trying to look stern and hits the baton against her arm, trying to look like she's going to really take this responsibility seriously, and she promises that the better woman will win. Before Lacey is done, Jimmy Jacobs walks in. It's like he's just peeking into the interview, and then he decides to take over, grabbing the microphone. Jimmy Jacobs says that he's finding it difficult to get his face on Impact recently, but he has something to say, so he apologises for taking over the interview. But he is issuing an open challenge to any two women in the wrestling world. They don't have to be signed to TNA. At Lockdown, Kong and Hamada will defend the Knockouts Tag Team Championships inside the 6 sides of steel. So again, hurting the main Knockout storyline as well as advancing the New Age storyline. It's a 38 rated segment. Things aren't going particularly well with this. I feel like I'm saying this every week, but I don't want people to lose sort of trust in the New Age or the Project 10 Cube thing. I am going to see this through, and it is going to get better, I promise that. Especially something I've got planned for next week's show and to develop after that. The Knockouts particularly are a focus going forward with what I need to improve, and that's going to be something that I'm going to put a lot of effort into, and hopefully it will show in the episodes that we put out. We then get an extremely short match. Homicide, who will be in that X Division Escape match. The De Niro Homicide story has kind of gone cold a little bit. I think we will come back to it, but for now, Homicide has another focus, and he defeats Shark Boy pretty handily with a cutter. A decent performance for a jobber from Shark Boy, to be fair, a 42. Homicide with a 61, and it's just a short, simple, basic match. Having picked up the victory, Homicide stands tall in the ring. Despite his underwhelming start to 2010, he does have that opportunity in the X Division Escape match, and he could become the X Division champion and completely turn around his fortunes. James Storm and Robert Roode then cut a promo in the back, promoting their match with Generation Me, which was confirmed last week. They'll face them at Lockdown instead of the Hooligans. Nick and Matt Jackson may have a growing reputation in TNA, and Roode says that many people are calling them the hottest prospects in tag team wrestling. They laugh, they're not buying that. Beer Money will be keeping their eyes on Matt and Nick before that pay-per-view, no doubt, but the real test will be when they get them inside the 6 sides of steel and Generation Me have to face the toughest tag team on the planet. Storm adds that their opponents have never faced a challenge like the one they'll face at Lockdown, and for that, he's sorry about their damn luck. So advancing the storyline with the tag teams, it's still a 4-way tag team storyline just because where things are going to go in the future, not to give any spoilers or anything. I think it's pretty obvious that Machine Guns and Hooligans are always going to be there or thereabouts in the tag team division, but we've got that match for Lockdown, and I think Storm and Roode, particularly with them both improvising well, do a good job of building up that match. I think a 67 rating for the storyline will definitely help the match, so happy with that certainly. As we go into a commercial break, AJ Styles, just before the main event this is, I think, AJ Styles is seen in the back and he is looking for Kurt Angle, who headbutted him earlier in the night. That seems such a long time ago now. When the show returns, the two men are face to face in the back but are being kept apart by security. Tensions are running high between them. We're trying to create a chaotic atmosphere in the back here because our two biggest stars are having to be pulled apart. They will face at Lockdown, and AJ Styles, he doesn't want to wait. He wants to get his hands on Kurt Angle. Words are exchanged, but Paul Heyman now is on the scene, and he is trying his best to get the two men to calm down. Heyman says that he needs the champion to walk away. Kurt Angle has this temper, everybody knows it, and AJ just needs to walk away and save his anger for the match at Lockdown. The two competitors aren't listening until Paul Heyman suggests that the main event of the pay-per-view would be in jeopardy if they beat each other down tonight. He can't risk these two spoiling the pay-per-view, so he warns them. Styles does accept this point, but insists that he isn't done with Kurt Angle for the night. If they can't do it backstage here in TNA, then they can fight out on the streets. He is not going to let this lie with Kurt Angle. So AJ and Paul Heyman both doing well, improvising in an 87 rated segment. I only just noticed that actually. That is what we need, because we need the storyline to be at that level, gaining heat to the World Heavyweight Championship storyline. Really happy with that. I hope nothing we do in between now and the pay-per-view brings that down, because that is where we need this storyline to be. Jeff Hardy then makes his entrance ahead of the main event and takes a microphone with his 3 opponents who are outside on the ring. They'd already made their entrances. Jeff Hardy says that Hernandez teamed with Matt Morgan earlier tonight and proved just why Jeff Hardy was so desperate to name Supermex as the first member of his team. But tonight, he is even happier to announce 2 guys who he feels should be competing for titles at the pay-per-view. But he's delighted to have them because they have impressed him more than anybody since he came to TNA. His 2 partners, the 2 newest members of his Lethal Lockdown team, are Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, the Motor City Machine Guns. So Jeff Hardy doing well improvising there, and a good way to introduce Motor City Machine Guns to his team. I really like the idea of Jeff Hardy, Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin. I think at this time they all had a kind of cool aesthetic and I think they'd work well together. I think these are the guys who are pretty marketable at this time. I think they've got fans in all kinds of demographics, and I really am a fan of these 3, and I love the fact that tonight in the main event they will work together and pick up the victory. It's not a great main event. We knew Rob Terry would be slowed by injury. Hopefully he didn't have to exert himself too much with it being a 6-man, but Jeff Hardy and the Motor City Machine Guns defeating Desmond Wolfe, Eric Young and Rob Terry in 12 minutes and 1 second when Jeff Hardy pins Desmond Wolfe. Key there, he hits a twist of fate and then a swanton bomb. While Rob Terry was the weak link, we did get a good performance from Jeff Hardy and a good performance from Desmond Wolfe. That's why they're the 2 team captains. That's why this is their storyline. The match getting the crowd buzzing, but decisively Jeff Hardy picking up another pinfall victory over Desmond Wolfe, which is only going to infuriate him even more as we look to go into that go home show, which I think the last bit of this storyline I think is going to have a nice impact. It might actually be the go home segment. The final build to Team Hardy and Team Wolfe is currently penciled in to be the go home segment because of the surprise that we've got at the end. It's not a massive surprise actually, but it's just what I hope will be an impactful moment as we name the final members of those teams. Having just picked up the victory, the team of Jeff Hardy and the Motor City Machine Guns celebrate in the ring, along with Hernandez and another member of the TNA roster who we assume will be Matt Morgan. They will face Team Desmond Wolfe in the Lethal Lockdown. As the commentators appear ready to sign off, we hear of something that is going on in the back that they simply have to show us. So it's not really a great segment, but we go into a very good closing segment, an 85 rating. The segment did deserve better announcing, but we cut to the back, and despite listening to Paul Heyman earlier in the night, AJ Styles has once again fired himself up. He isn't going to wait, and he cannot be stopped as a brawl breaks out between AJ Styles and Kurt Angle in the back. Having previously appeared to be on the same page, the headbutt from earlier destroyed any idea that there could be a friendship between the two, and they brawl past Paul Heyman, who despairs at their actions. He thought he'd got this under control, but he's realising a lot of people in TNA might be having to learn the Paul Heyman way, but Paul Heyman is also having to learn that people like AJ Styles, people like Kurt Angle cannot be controlled. They are unique, once-in-a-lifetime competitors, and when they want to fight, they're going to beat the hell out of each other. AJ Styles hits a stiff shot to Kurt Angle before turning to Paul Heyman and daring him to take the match from them at Lockdown. He knows that Paul Heyman can't afford to cancel this pay-per-view main event at such short notice, and he's taking advantage of that, and he is going to keep fighting. The brawl continuing, ending up spilling back into the impact zone. So Jeff, Alex Shelley and Sabin are still in the ring. Styles had initiated the fight, and for this reason he looked to have got the better of Kurt Angle. He's getting his revenge for that headbutt earlier in the night. Kurt looks to gain some separation from the champion by heading to the ground below the stage, but this is a bad idea. He puts himself in harm's way as AJ dives from the top of the stage, hitting a phenomenal forearm to Kurt Angle below, taking him down. Impact ending, going off the air with the two men down on the ground, laid out. The point being that these two are so evenly matched. They are clearly the two best performers in terms of ratings in the game, but in terms of how they've been pushed, the two top guys in the company. And as we can see by the final image of Impact, 10 days before the pay-per-view, these two are going to leave it all in the ring inside the 6 sides of steel. So we're really putting over the 6 sides of steel, the cage match. Like I said, I'm not necessarily a fan of it myself, but if we go into it, you have to commit to it and you have to put everything behind it. And I do think that if there are new viewers to TNA, so to speak, it certainly would intrigue you. I think the first time you hear of a Lethal Lockdown all-steel cage pay-per-view, it sounds brilliant. To me, kind of the WWE way of having Hell in a Cell, TLC, where your sort of gimmick matches end up being forced in based on when the pay-per-view happens to fall, rather than the storyline sort of justifying the need for a Hell in a Cell. It sort of diluted gimmick matches to me and stuff like that. Hernandez, just like Homicide, his contract's coming up, probably should look to secure him on a long-term deal. The viewership is going up a little bit. I think I'm just going to have a look at where that lies in the general lay of the land in terms of our best ratings so far. So it's our best one yet, I think. So definitely there is some traction there. We're starting April in a good way. We've got another episode and then the pay-per-view. Really, really looking forward to Lockdown and the way the storyline's going with AJ Styles and Kurt Angle. Like I said, just before or just after the last pay-per-view, Kurt Angle and AJ Styles I think has the potential to be our best match yet. We've already done it at Genesis, but the storyline wasn't there. I'm going to actually check how the storyline's doing as well. It was originally Kurt Angle and Mr. Anderson, but it's now AJ and Kurt. Obviously, a lot of people involved in it, to be fair, as minor characters and stuff. But it's an 81 currently, so we have built it up from where it was. But we definitely need a strong go-home show and a big segment between them two to try and make sure that this is, and Lockdown is, the best show that we have done yet.